The boy's small fingers locked around her wrist like iron chains. "Don't go." His voice cracked. "Please, Papa needs you. He just don't know it yet." Emmeline Harding stood in the frozen yard of a ranch that wasn't hers, facing a child who wasn't hers, while a man watched from the doorway with eyes colder than the Wyoming winter. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. She'd arrived at the wrong ranch, and somehow a 7-year-old boy had decided she was the answer to prayers she'd never heard him speak. If you want to know how a lost bride found her true home, subscribe to our channel and stay until the end. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach driver dropped her trunk in the snow and pointed east. "Thornwood Ranch, ma'am. That's what the sign says." Emmeline Harding clutched her carpet bag and stared at the weathered wooden arch. The name carved into it was clear enough, Thornwood, but her letter said, Whitfield. "Sir, I believe there's been a mistake. I'm meant for the Whitfield property." The driver was already climbing back onto his seat. "Whitfield's 3 hours north. Storm's coming. You won't make it tonight." "But—" "Ain't my concern, ma'am. I was paid to deliver you here. Good luck." The coach pulled away wheels, crunching through frozen ground, leaving Emmy alone with her trunk, her carpet bag, and a growing knot of dread in her stomach. The wind cut through her wool coat like it wasn't there. Boston winters were cold, but this Wyoming wind had teeth. It bit through fabric, through skin, straight down to bone. She picked up her skirts and started toward the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Someone who could give her directions, perhaps shelter until the storm passed. She'd taken 3 steps when the door banged open. A boy burst out running full speed across the yard. Behind him, a black and white dog bounded through the snow barking. "Captain, no! Come back!" The dog ignored him completely. It ran straight for Emmy, and for one terrible moment she thought it would attack. She braced herself. The dog stopped at her feet, sat, looked up at her with intelligent brown eyes and a slowly wagging tail. The boy skidded to a halt, chest heaving. He stared at her, then at the dog, then back at her. "Captain don't like strangers," he said slowly. "He barks at everyone, even Mrs. Brennan, and she's been coming here since I was born." Emmy looked down at the dog. It leaned against her leg like they were old friends. "Perhaps he's just cold." "He ain't cold. He's got fur." The boy stepped closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Who are you?" "My name is Emmeline Harding. I'm looking for the Whitfield Ranch. The driver seems to have made an error." "Whitfield?" The boy's nose wrinkled. "He's mean. Yelled at me once for crossing his land. Called me a trespassing little—" He stopped, glancing toward the cabin. "A bad word." "I see. You're gonna marry him." The question hit like a slap. Emmy straightened her spine. "That was the arrangement, yes." "Was. Is. That is the arrangement." The boy tilted his head. His eyes were gray-pale as winter sky, and far too knowing for his age. "You don't sound too sure about that, ma'am." Before Emmy could respond, a man's voice cut across the yard. "Nate, get away from her!" Emmy turned. He stood in the cabin doorway, broad-shouldered and still watching her with an expression she couldn't read. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, strong nose, deep-set eyes that held the same gray as the boy's. A scar ran along his chin, pale against weathered skin. He didn't move toward her. Didn't offer greeting or help. Just stood there, blocking the door like a wall. "Papa Captain likes her," Nate said. "He sat for her. He never sits for nobody." "Doesn't matter. She's not staying." Emmy felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion. The stagecoach driver delivered me to the wrong location. If you could simply direct me to the Whitfield property. 3 hours north. Follow the creek until you hit the fork, then bear right." "Thank you. I'll be on my way." She turned to collect her trunk, but the wind chose that moment to gust hard enough to stagger her. The sky, which had been merely gray, was now darkening to something angry. Snow started falling in thick, heavy flakes. "You can't go now." Emmy turned back. The man hadn't moved from the doorway. "The storm will pass." "That ain't a passing storm, ma'am. That's a 3-day blow. You try to walk to Whitfield's in this, they'll find your body come spring." Nate made a small distressed sound. "Papa." "Truth is truth, boy. Better she hear it plain." Emmy stood in the falling snow trunk at her feet, options narrowing by the second. She could feel the temperature dropping, feel the wind picking up strength. She was trapped. "I won't impose longer than necessary," she said carefully. "If you have a barn, you'll freeze in the barn." The man's jaw tightened. "We got a spare room. Was my—" He stopped. Something flickered across his face there and gone. "It's empty. You can use it until the storm breaks." "Papa." "Not now, Nate." The boy's face fell, but he didn't argue. He grabbed Emmy's carpet bag before she could stop him. "I'll carry this, ma'am." "That's not necessary. Mama always said guests shouldn't have to carry their own things." He was already heading for the cabin, Captain trotting at his heels. Emmy stood frozen, both literally and figuratively. The man in the doorway still hadn't moved, still watched her with those cold gray eyes. "Well," he said, "you coming in, or you planning to become a snowdrift?" She grabbed her trunk handle and dragged it toward the cabin. He stepped aside just enough to let her pass, and she caught the smell of wood smoke, leather, and something else. Something that made her think of safety, though nothing about this man suggested safety at all. The cabin was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. A fire blazed in the hearth, and the heat hit her cold, numbed face like a blessing. The second thing she noticed was the emptiness. The space was clean and functional. Table chairs, cook stove shelves lined with supplies. But there was something missing, something she couldn't name until Nate set her carpet bag on a chair, and she saw his small hand brush against a framed photograph on the mantel. A woman, young, dark-haired, smiling. She understood then. The spare room that was the careful emptiness. The way the man looked at her like she was a threat rather than a stranded traveler. Widow. The word settled in her mind with the weight of understanding. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for your loss." His head snapped toward her. For a moment something raw flickered in his eyes. Then the wall came back up, solid as stone. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself." He walked past her and out the door into the growing storm. Nate watched him go, then turned to Emmy with a sigh that seemed too old for his years. "He ain't usually this bad. Well," he paused. "He's always kind of bad, but not mean bad, just sad bad." Emmy knelt to bring herself to his eye level. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the careful way he held himself. This child had learned too young how to navigate a grieving adult. "How long ago?" 3 years. Nate's voice was steady, practiced. "She died having my baby sister. Baby died too. Papa don't talk about it." 3 years. And still the house felt like a tomb. "What was her name?" "Your mama." "Sarah." The name came out soft, reverent. "She had black hair like mine, and she could sing real pretty, and she made the best apple cake in the whole territory." His lip trembled. "I'm starting to forget what she sounded like. Papa won't tell stories about her. Says it hurts too much." Emmy's heart cracked. She knew that kind of grief, the kind that locked away memories because touching them burned. "Would you tell me a story about her?" Nate looked up, surprised. "You want to hear?" "Very much." He was quiet for a moment. Then slowly he sat on the floor and patted the space beside him. Emmy settled down, skirts pooling around her, while Captain wedged himself between them. "She used to sing me to sleep," Nate began. "Every night. Papa would sit in that chair there and listen. Sometimes he'd hum along real quiet like he thought nobody could hear." His eyes went to the chair by the fire, worn and empty. He don't sit there no more. Why not? Says it's her chair. Says nobody else should sit in it. Nate shrugged, but his voice was small. I think he's scared that if somebody else sits there, he'll forget she used to. Emmy looked at the chair. It was simple wooden frame, faded cushion arms, worn smooth by years of use. But sitting there empty by the fire, it looked like a grave marker. What was her favorite song? All Things Bright and Beautiful. Nate sang a few notes off-key but sweet. She'd sing it while she worked, said it reminded her that even hard days had pretty things in them. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it came Caleb Snow dusting his shoulders, arms full of firewood. He stopped when he saw them on the floor together. His face went through something complicated, surprise, suspicion, something that might have been longing before settling back into neutrality. Nate, you got chores? Yes, Papa. The boy scrambled up but paused at the door. Miss Emmy was asking about Mama. She wanted to hear stories. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's so. I hope I didn't overstep, Emmy said, rising. He seemed to want to talk about her. He talks too much. Caleb dumped the firewood by the hearth with more force than necessary. About things that ain't strangers' business. Papa. Chores, Nate. Now. The boy's face crumpled. He grabbed his coat and fled outside, Captain on his heels. Emmy stood in the charged silence, anger rising in her chest. He's a child who lost his mother. He needs to speak about her. You don't know what he needs. I know what it looks like when a child is drowning in grief that no one will acknowledge. Caleb spun to face her. You don't know anything about this family. You're a stranger who got dumped on my doorstep by mistake. Don't pretend that gives you the right to what? Listen, show basic human kindness. To come into my house and start digging into things that ain't yours to dig. They stood facing each other, both breathing hard. Emmy's hands were shaking from cold, from anger, from something else she didn't want to name. You're right, she said finally, forcing her voice level. I'm a stranger. I have no rights here. As soon as the storm breaks, I'll be gone, and you can go back to... She stopped herself before she said something unforgivable. Go back to what? His voice was dangerous. Nothing. I apologize. No. Say it. She met his eyes. Go back to pretending that not talking about her is the same as not hurting. Go back to watching your son drown in silence because you're too afraid to remember your wife out loud. The color drained from his face. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then something broke. Just for a second. She saw it, the raw bleeding wound beneath all that anger. You think I don't know? His voice cracked. You think I don't see him struggling? I'm his father. I see everything. I just... He turned away, shoulders rigid. I can't. Talking about her makes it real. And if it's real, then she's really gone, and I have to... He couldn't finish. Emmy stood very still, hardly breathing. She hadn't meant to push this hard, hadn't meant to crack him open in his own kitchen while his son was outside, and a storm raged beyond the walls. But now that the crack was there, she couldn't pretend she didn't see inside. I lost someone too, she said quietly. Not a spouse, but someone I loved. And for a long time, I thought that if I just didn't speak about it, the pain would stay manageable, small, contained. She paused. It doesn't work that way. The silence just makes the pain grow teeth. He didn't turn around, didn't respond. Emmy gathered what remained of her dignity. I'll stay in the spare room until the storm passes. I'll keep out of your way, and I won't, she swallowed. I won't ask your son any more questions about his mother. She walked toward the door she assumed led to the spare room. Her hand was on the latch when his voice stopped her. Sarah. She turned. He still faced away from her, but his voice was rough, scraped raw. Her name was Sarah, and she used to say that the best thing about hard times was that they taught you who you really were. A long pause. I think she'd be ashamed of who I've become. Emmy didn't move. Didn't speak. She understood somehow that this was a moment fragile as ice on a spring pond. One wrong word and it would shatter. Grief changes us, she said finally. It doesn't have to be forever. He turned then. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry. The anger was gone, replaced by something exhausted and lost. I don't know how to be anything else anymore. Maybe you could learn. The door banged open. Nate burst in, snow-covered and breathless, Captain barking at his heels. Papa, the mare, she's foaling. Something's wrong. She's thrashing and... Caleb was moving before the boy finished speaking. He grabbed a lantern and a kit from beside the door. Stay here, he ordered, and was gone into the white wall of storm. Nate stood trembling, wet and scared. The mare's been carrying almost a year. Papa was worried something might go wrong. It's all right. Emmy knelt, taking the boy's frozen hands in hers. Your papa knows what he's doing. But what if... Have you eaten supper? The question threw him. What? Supper? Have you eaten? No, ma'am. Then we'll start there. She stood, moving toward the cook stove with a calm she didn't feel. Show me where things are. We'll have food ready for your papa when he comes in. Nate stared at her for a moment. Then slowly some of the fear left his face. The flowers in the crock by the window. Mama's cookbook is in the chest there. There's a recipe she used when Papa worked late. She called it rancher's supper. It's fast and filling. Emmy found the cookbook, worn leather cover pages stained with years of use. The handwriting inside was graceful and clear. Rancher's supper for nights when he needs feeding more than fussing. Her throat tightened. This woman, dead 3 years, was still trying to take care of her family. Will you help me make it? Emmy asked. I don't know my way around this kitchen. Nate's face lit up. Yes, ma'am. I'll show you everything. They worked together while the storm howled outside. Nate measured and stirred, chattering about his mother's cooking, his father's favorites, the time he accidentally put salt in a cake instead of sugar, and Papa ate the whole thing anyway, because waste not, want not. By the time Caleb returned, stomping snow from his boots and smelling of horse and hay, the table was set, and a hot meal waited. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, his son laughing, the strange woman in Sarah's apron, food steaming on Sarah's dishes. Emmy saw his face flicker, saw him start to build the wall back up. The mare? She asked quickly before he could close off again. Fine. His voice was gruff. Philly came backward, but she's breathing. Both of them are. Thank God. Emmy gestured to the table. Nate showed me your wife's recipe book. I hope you don't mind. He said this was a favorite. Caleb looked at the food, then at his son's hopeful face. Something in him seemed to give way, not all at once, but enough. Smells right, he admitted. Been a long time since anybody made this. Miss Emmy let me do the stirring, Nate said proudly. I didn't burn nothing. Anything, Caleb corrected automatically. Didn't burn anything. That's what I said. The ghost of a smile crossed Caleb's face. Just a flicker, barely there, but Emmy saw it, and something in her chest eased. They ate in something approaching peace. Nate talked enough for all three of them, filling silence with stories about the horses, the coming winter, his hopes for Christmas. Caleb listened with half his attention, but he ate steadily, and twice Emmy caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't name. After supper, Nate insisted on showing Emmy his collection of carved animals. Papa made all of them. He's real good with his hands. While Caleb cleaned the dishes. This one's my favorite. Nate held up a horse, small and perfectly detailed. Mama asked Papa to make it when I was born. Said every boy needed his first horse, even if it was wooden. It's beautiful. Papa don't carve no more. Nate's voice dropped. Says his hands forgot how. Emmy looked toward the kitchen where Caleb stood with his back to them, shoulders rigid. His hands hadn't forgotten. He'd just stopped letting himself create beauty. That night, Emmy lay in the spare room. Sarah's sewing room, she realized from the supplies still neatly arranged on shelves, and listened to the storm rage outside. Through the thin wall, she could hear Nate's bed creak as he tossed in sleep. Could hear Caleb's footsteps pacing in the main room long after the boy settled. She'd come west to marry a stranger because there was nothing left for her in Boston. Her reputation destroyed by a lie, her engagement broken by a coward, her prospects reduced to servitude or starvation. Marcus Whitfield's advertisement had seemed like salvation. Respectable widower seeks bride. No romantic promises, just honest partnership. She hadn't expected love. She'd stopped believing in love the day Henry returned her ring with a letter explaining that his family could not accept a woman touched by scandal, no matter how innocent she actually was. But she'd expected a new start. A place to belong. Now she was stranded in the wrong house with a man who flinched from her presence and a boy who looked at her like she was the answer to prayers she'd never heard. The door creaked. Emmy tensed. "Miss Emmy." Nate's whisper came through the dark. "Are you awake?" "Yes. What's wrong?" A small figure appeared in the doorway clutching a blanket. "I had a bad dream. About Mama. Sometimes I come in here when I have bad dreams. I forgot you were. I'll go back." "Wait." Emmy sat up. "Would you like to stay, just until you feel better?" Silence. Then the patter of small feet, and Nate was climbing onto the narrow bed, curling against her side like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Mama used to hold me like this," he whispered. "She smelled like lavender. You smell different, but nice." Emmy wrapped an arm around him, feeling his small body slowly relax. "What was your dream about?" "Mama was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her. She kept talking and talking, but there was no sound. And then she disappeared." Emmy's heart ached. "Maybe she was telling you she loves you. That's what mothers say, isn't it? Even when we can't hear them." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Miss Emmy." "Yes. I know you're supposed to go to Mr. Whitfield's, but I wish you didn't have to." Emmy closed her eyes. "I know, sweetheart." "God sent you to the wrong ranch. Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe. Or maybe—" Nate yawned, sleep pulling at him. "Maybe he knew the right one all along." He was asleep within minutes, breathing soft and even against her shoulder. Emmy stared at the dark ceiling while the storm howled and a stranger's child slept in her arms and wondered if a 7-year-old boy might be right. Morning came gray and white. The storm had gentled, but not stopped, snow still falling in steady curtains. Emmy woke to find Nate gone, his spot on the bed cool. She could hear voices in the main room, Caleb's low rumble, Nate's higher chatter. She dressed quickly, finger-combing her hair and pinching color into her cheeks before opening the door. They sat at the breakfast table, heads bent together over something. As she approached, she saw it was a piece of paper, a letter, judging by the handwriting. They both looked up at once. "Miss Emmy." Nate's face was strange, excited and scared at the same time. "A rider came through before dawn. Brought mail from town." Emmy's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Caleb held up the letter. His expression was unreadable. "It's from Whitfield," he said slowly. "Seems he got married 3 days ago. Widow from Denver. He says—" His jaw tightened. "He says he won't be needing a mail-order bride after all. He apologizes for the inconvenience." The words hit Emmy like a physical blow. She'd traveled 2,000 miles, spent her last money on the journey, left everything she knew for the promise of a new life. And now she had nothing. No fiancé, no money, no way home, nowhere to go. She must have swayed because suddenly Caleb was on his feet, chair scraping back. "Sit down," he ordered, guiding her to a chair. "Nate, get water." "I'm fine," Emmy managed, but her voice sounded far away. "I just need a moment to—" "You're white as milk and shaking. Sit." She sat. Nate pressed a cup of water into her hands, his small face worried. "What are you going to do, Miss Emmy?" It was the question she couldn't answer. What could she do? She had no funds for return passage. No references for employment who would write a recommendation for a woman who'd been dismissed in scandal. She was stranded in Wyoming territory with nothing but a trunk of clothes and a reputation already in tatters. "There's a boarding house in town," she heard herself say, Perhaps they need help, or the school might want a teacher. Boarding house won't hire until spring. Caleb's voice was flat. And the school teacher's been there 30 years, ain't going nowhere. Then I'll find something else. What laundry kitchen work? His eyes swept over her hands, soft still, despite everything. Boston hands. Educated hands. You wouldn't last a week. Anger cut through the fog. You don't know what I'm capable of. I know what this territory does to women who ain't prepared for it. Then I'll become prepared. They stared at each other. Nate looked between them, desperate. She could stay here, he blurted. She could work for us, teach me lessons, and help with the house and… Nate, you said we needed help. You said managing the house and my learning and the ranch was too much. You said… I said a lot of things. That don't mean… Please, Papa. Nate's voice cracked. Please, just till spring. Just till she finds something else. Please. The cabin went quiet. Snow ticked against the windows. The fire popped and settled. Emmy watched Caleb's face, the war happening behind his eyes. He didn't want her here. Every line of his body screamed resistance. But his son was begging. His son who had nightmares and needed someone and had looked at her like she was a miracle. Through winter, Caleb said. Finally the words dragged out of him. Room and board in exchange for teaching the boy and helping with the house. Come spring, you find other arrangements. Papa! Nate threw himself at his father's waist. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Calm down, boy. It's a practical arrangement, nothing more. Caleb looked at Emmy over his son's head. Understood. Emmy nodded slowly. Understood. Good. He extracted himself from Nate's embrace. I got work in the barn. Boy, show her where everything is. And Miss Harding. She met his eyes. Don't go making yourself comfortable. Spring comes faster than you think. He walked out into the snow, leaving Emmy with a jubilant child, and the strange, fragile feeling that her life had just changed direction in ways she couldn't begin to predict. Nate grabbed her hand, bouncing. Come on, I'll show you everything. Mama's sewing stuff, and where the preserves are, and Captain's favorite spot, and… Emmy let herself be pulled along, the boy's excitement washing over her like warmth. Through winter, Caleb had said, nothing more. But watching Nate's face shine with hope, feeling his small hand warm in hers, Emmy wondered if either of them believed that anymore. The first week passed in careful patterns. Emmy learned the rhythm of the Thornwood Ranch breakfast before dawn lessons with Nate until midday afternoon chores supper as the light died. She learned which floorboards creaked, which cabinet stuck, which cup was Nate's favorite and must never be used by anyone else. She learned that Caleb left before she woke and returned after dark, avoiding her with a determination that would have been impressive if it weren't so exhausting. He's always like this, Nate said on the third morning, watching his father's retreating back through the window. When something scares him, he works until he's too tired to think about it. What makes you think I scare him? Nate gave her a look far too old for 7. You're in Mama's kitchen, Miss Emmy, using Mama's things, teaching me like Mama did. He paused. You don't look nothing like her, but sometimes when you laugh, Papa gets this face like someone punched him in the stomach. Emmy's hands stilled on the bread dough. I'm sorry. I don't mean to… I didn't say it was bad. Nate climbed onto his stool, reaching for the flour. Hurting means you still feel something. Papa stopped feeling anything for a long time. Least now he's feeling again, even if it's just scared. She didn't know how to respond to that. The morning lessons became her favorite time. Nate was bright, eager, desperate for attention that his father couldn't give. He devoured books like a starving child, devoured food, asking questions Emmy hadn't considered since her own school days. Miss Emmy, how come birds can fly but people can't? Miss Emmy, if God made everything, who made God? Miss Emmy, do you think Mama can see us from heaven? That last one stopped her cold. They were sitting at the kitchen table, arithmetic forgotten when he asked it. His gray eyes, so like his father's, held a desperate hope that made her chest ache. "I think," Emmy said carefully, "that the people who love us never really leave. They stay in our hearts watching over us." "Papa says that's just stories people tell to feel better. What do you think?" Nate was quiet for a long moment. "I think she sees me. Sometimes at night, when I'm real scared, I feel something warm, like a hug I can't see." His voice dropped. "I never told Papa. He'd say I was being foolish." "It's not foolish to feel your mother's love." "You really think so?" "I know so." Nate's face crumpled. Before Emmy could react, he'd launched himself across the table and into her arms, sobbing against her shoulder, with 3 years of held-back grief. She held him while he cried, stroking his hair, murmuring nonsense words of comfort. Her own eyes burned. This boy had been alone in his grief for so long, surrounded by a father who couldn't bear to speak of what they'd lost. The door opened. Caleb stood frozen, taking in the scene, his son weeping in a stranger's arms, finding comfort he couldn't provide. Emmy expected anger, expected him to tear Nate away to accuse her of overstepping. Instead, something in his face just broke. He turned and walked back out into the cold. "Papa?" Nate lifted his head, tears still wet on his cheeks. "Papa." But Caleb was already gone. Emmy found him an hour later standing at the edge of the property where a small wooden cross rose from the frozen ground. She'd known it was there, Nate had pointed it out from the window, but she'd never approached. Now she walked toward it, her boots crunching through snow until she stood beside him. He didn't acknowledge her presence. "Nate's worried about you," she said quietly. "He shouldn't see me like this." "Like what?" "Human." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Weak." "Grieving isn't weakness, Mr. Thornton." "In this territory it is." His voice was bitter. "You show weakness, people take advantage. Neighbors eye your land. Creditors call in debts. Even your own hired hands start wondering if maybe they should be running things." He paused. "I held it together for 3 years. Kept this ranch going, kept my boy fed and clothed and alive. And now you show up, and everything I built? I didn't mean to. I know you didn't." He finally looked at her, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. "That's what makes it worse. You didn't do anything except be kind to my son. You listened to him. You held him while he cried. You did what I should have been doing all along." Emmy didn't know what to say. "Sarah would be ashamed of me." His voice cracked on his wife's name. "She'd look at how I've been with Nate and she'd be so disappointed." "She'd understand." "Would she?" He laughed, harsh and broken. "I let our son grieve alone for 3 years. I couldn't even say her name out loud until you forced it out of me. What kind of father does that? A father who was drowning himself." The words hung between them. Caleb stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You speak like someone who knows." "I told you I lost someone." "You didn't say who." Emmy hesitated. She'd kept this story locked away, shared with no one since leaving Boston. But standing here in front of Sarah's grave with Sarah's husband, looking at her like she might have answers he desperately needed. "My father," she said. "When I was 16, he was a teacher Latin and Greek at a boys' academy. One of his students accused him of impropriety." The old anger rose in her throat. "It was a lie. The boy had been caught cheating and wanted revenge. But by the time the truth came out, my father had already—" She couldn't finish. "He killed himself," Caleb said flatly. Emmy nodded, not trusting her voice. "And you blamed yourself." "I found him." The words came out wooden rehearsed. She'd said them so many times in her own mind. "If I'd come home earlier, if I'd known how much the accusations were destroying him, if I'd—" "Stop." Caleb's hand closed over hers, rough and warm. "You were 16. It wasn't your fault. I know that now, but for years—" She swallowed hard. "I couldn't talk about him. couldn't say his name, couldn't even look at his photograph without wanting to scream. My mother remarried, and I watched her pack away everything that reminded her of him, and I thought that was the only way to survive. Bury it so deep it couldn't hurt you anymore. Did it work? No. She met his eyes. It doesn't work. It never works. The grief just grows teeth in the dark. They stood in silence while the wind cut across the frozen ground. Emmy was acutely aware of his hand still covering hers, the warmth of his palm against her cold fingers. "I don't know how to let her go," Caleb said finally. "You don't have to let her go. You just have to let her be remembered instead of mourned." He was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he released her hand. "Dinner's at 6, he said roughly, and walked back toward the barn. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, Caleb sat in Sarah's chair. Emmy noticed at first the slight pause when he entered, the way his eyes went to the worn wooden seat by the fire. She waited for him to choose the kitchen chair, like he always did, to maintain the careful distance he'd built. Instead, he walked to Sarah's chair and sat down. Nate's eyes went wide. "Papa, just a chair, boy." Caleb's voice was gruff, but his hands trembled slightly where they gripped the armrests. "Shouldn't have let it sit empty so long." Nate looked at Emmy, wonder on his face. She gave him a small smile, hope flickering in her chest. After the boy went to bed, Emmy sat mending by the fire while Caleb pretended to read the same page of his almanac for 20 minutes. "You talked to him," he said finally. "At Sarah's grave. What did you tell him?" Emmy's needle paused. "That grief grows teeth in the dark." Sounds like something from a book. My father used to say it. He was a teacher. Caleb was quiet. Then, "The boy who accused him. What happened to him?" "Nothing. His family had money and connections. My father had neither." "That ain't right." "No, it wasn't." Caleb set down his almanac, finally meeting her eyes. "Is that why you came west, running from what happened?" "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Boston." Emmy resumed her mending, forcing her hands steady. "After my father died, my mother remarried. Her new husband made it clear I wasn't welcome. I found work as a governess, and for a while things were bearable." "What changed?" She was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. But something about the firelight, the quiet cabin, the man watching her with something other than suspicion. For the first time, it loosened her tongue. "The man I worked for made advances. When I refused, his wife blamed me. She spread rumors that I'd tried to seduce her husband." The old shame burned in her throat. "I was dismissed without references. No respectable family would hire me. My engagement, I was engaged to a banker's son, was dissolved. His family couldn't accept a woman touched by scandal. Even though it was lies, scandal doesn't care about truth, Mr. Thornton, only about appearance." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Man should have stood by you." "He was weak." Emmy shrugged, though the motion felt brittle. "I realized later that I'd never actually loved him. I loved the idea of security, the promise of a normal life." She laughed softly. "Instead, I ended up answering advertisements for mail-order brides and traveling 2,000 miles to marry a man I'd never met. And got dumped on the wrong doorstep. They shared a moment of something that might have been understanding. Then Caleb looked away, jaw working. "Whitfield's a fool," he said gruffly. "Whatever widow he married, she ain't half of what he gave up." Emmy's heart stuttered. "That's kind of you to say." "Ain't kind, just true." He stood abruptly, the moment too vulnerable for him to sustain. "Dawn comes early. Best get some sleep." He was gone before she could respond. Emmy sat alone by the dying fire, Caleb's words echoing in her mind. Something had shifted between them. Tonight, some wall had lowered, some door had cracked open. She wasn't foolish enough to call it hope. But it felt dangerously close. The knock came 3 days later. Emmy was elbow-deep in bread dough when Captain started barking. Nate ran to the window, pressing his face against the glass. "It's Mrs. Brennan." Emmy's stomach dropped. She'd heard about Josephine Brennan, the territory's midwife, Sarah's closest friend, the woman who'd been present when Sarah died. Nate spoke of her with a mix of affection and wariness, the way children speak of adults who see too much. The door opened before Emmy could wipe the flour from her hands. Josie Brennan was 60 if she was a day, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that could cut glass. She swept into the cabin like she owned it, her gaze landing on Emmy with the weight of immediate judgment. "So, you're the one." "Mrs. Brennan, it's a pleasure to—" "Save the pleasantries, girl. I've been hearing stories for a week, and I want to see for myself." Those sharp eyes swept the cabin, missing nothing. "Using Sarah's apron, I see. Her dishes, her recipe book." "Nate showed me where things were. I meant no disrespect." "Didn't say you did." Josie moved to the stove, lifting pot lids, examining Emmy's work with critical attention. "Bread's rising proper. That's something. Sarah's recipe." "Yes, ma'am." Josie turned to Nate, her expression softening slightly. "You teaching her, boy?" "Yes, Mrs. Brennan. Miss Emmy says I'm the best teacher she ever had." "Did she now?" Those cutting eyes returned to Emmy. "Flattery won't work on me, girl. I've known this family since before you were born. I delivered that boy into the world, and I held his mama's hand when she left it. So if you think you can waltz in here and—" "I don't think anything, ma'am." Emmy forced her voice steady. "I'm here because a stagecoach driver made a mistake, and a snowstorm kept me from correcting it. Come spring, I'll be gone." "Will you—" The question held weight. Emmy didn't understand. "That's the arrangement." Josie studied her for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She laughed, a harsh, rusty sound, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years. "God above, you've got spine. I'll give you that." She pulled out a chair and sat uninvited. "Make me some of that coffee I smell, and we'll talk." Emmy exchanged a glance with Nate, who shrugged helpfully. She made the coffee. For the next hour, Josie Brennan interrogated her with the precision of a prosecutor. Where was she from? What did her father do? Why did she leave Boston? What exactly had happened with the employer's wife? Emmy answered as honestly as she could, watching Josie's face for any reaction. The older woman gave nothing away. Finally, Josie set down her empty cup. "You've had a hard road, girl. I won't pretend otherwise." She stood collecting her coat. "But hard roads make strong women, and this territory eats soft ones alive. Maybe you'll survive here. Maybe you won't. That's reassuring." "I don't do reassuring. I do truth." Josie paused at the door, her expression shifting to something almost human. "Sarah was my friend. Best friend I ever had, if I'm being honest. I was there when she birthed that boy, and I was there when she died. I promised her I'd look after her family." "Then you should know I'm not trying to replace her." "No. What are you trying to do?" Emmy glanced at Nate, who was pretending to read while hanging on every word. "Help," she said simply. "That's all." Josie was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "See that you do." She left without another word. But somehow Emmy felt she'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. That night, Caleb came in earlier than usual. He stopped short when he saw the kitchen bread cooling on the counter, stew bubbling on the stove, Nate working on his letters at the table with Emmy guiding his hand. "Mrs. Brennan came by," Nate announced. She asked Miss Emmy a whole bunch of questions. Caleb's eyes met Emmy's. "What kind of questions?" "The kind designed to determine if I'm worthy of cooking in her friend's kitchen." "And?" "I survived, barely." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Caleb's face. "Josie's protective. She and Sarah were close." "So I gathered." He hung up his coat, moving toward the stove. "She say anything else?" "That hard roads make strong women." Emmy ladled stew into bowls. and that this territory eats soft ones alive. Sounds like Josie. Caleb took his bowl, their fingers brushing in the exchange. He didn't pull away immediately. She's not wrong, though. Wyoming's got no patience for weakness. So I keep hearing. You don't seem weak. Emmy looked up, surprised by the admission. I don't. Woman who travels 2,000 miles to marry a stranger ain't weak. Woman who gets abandoned and keeps standing ain't weak. He paused, something working behind his eyes. Woman who holds my boy while he cries, even knowing she's got no place here, that takes a different kind of strength. Emmy didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them, charged with something new. Nate broke it, obvious and wonderful. Does this mean Miss Emmy can stay past spring? Eat your dinner, boy. But Papa, I said eat. Nate obeyed, but his eyes sparkled with barely contained hope. Emmy ate her own dinner, trying not to think about the warmth spreading through her chest, trying not to notice how Caleb's eyes kept drifting to her across the table, trying not to feel like she was starting to belong. The second week brought harder questions. Emmy found Sarah's journal tucked in the back of a drawer wrapped in faded ribbon. She didn't read it, that felt like a violation, but she brought it to Caleb that evening after Nate had gone to bed. I found this. I thought you should know. He took it from her hands like it might burn him. For a long moment, he just stared at the worn leather cover, his throat working. I didn't know she kept a journal. It was hidden. Nate probably doesn't know either. Caleb's fingers traced the ribbon, gentle as a prayer. 3 years. 3 years, and this was here the whole time. Do you want me to leave you alone with it? No. The word came out harsh. I mean, would you stay? I don't think I can. He couldn't finish, but Emmy understood. She sat in the chair across from him while he opened the journal with shaking hands. She watched his face as he read, the way his expression shifted from dread to wonder to something unbearably tender. She wrote about Nate's first steps. He said hoarsely. I forgot. God, I forgot how she described it. Said he looked like a drunk trying to find the door. A wet laugh escaped him. That's exactly what it was like. Emmy stayed quiet, letting him have this. He read for nearly an hour, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes just sitting in silence with tears tracking down his weathered face. Emmy kept the fire fed and the coffee hot, a steady presence without demanding anything. Finally, he closed the journal. The last entry is 3 days before she died. His voice was raw. She wrote about the baby coming. How excited she was. How she couldn't wait to see Nate as a big brother. He pressed the journal to his chest, like he was trying to absorb his wife's words through his skin. She didn't know. She had no idea she wouldn't. She knew she loved you, Emmy said softly. That's what she'd want you to remember. Caleb looked at her, then really looked, with eyes stripped of every defense he'd built. Why are you so kind to me, after how I treated you? Because kindness isn't something you have to earn. Emmy reached across the space between them, covering his hand with hers. And because I understand what it is to be so lost in grief that you forget how to live. He didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long moment, hand in hand, while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Then Caleb did something unexpected. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Stay, he said roughly. Not just through spring. Stay. Emmy's heart stopped. Caleb, I know it's sudden. I know I've got no right to ask after how I've been, but watching you with Nate, watching you bring life back into this house. He swallowed hard. Sarah would have wanted this. She would have wanted him to have someone. She would have wanted me to stop hiding from the world. I ain't asking for love. His grip tightened. I ain't fool enough to think I deserve that. But I'm asking for a chance to show you I can be better than I've been. Emmy stared at him, her mind racing. 2 weeks ago, this man had looked at her like she was an invader. Now he was holding her hand, asking her to stay, offering something that looked terrifyingly like a future. "I need time," she whispered, "to think." "Take all the time you need." He released her hand, standing. "Just don't leave without telling me first." He walked to his bedroom door, then paused. "Emmy." It was the first time he'd used her name. "Yes. Thank you. For finding the journal. For being here when I read it." His voice caught. "For giving me back my wife even just for an hour." He closed the door behind him. Emmy sat alone in the quiet cabin, her hand still warm where his had held it. Something had changed tonight. Something fundamental. She just wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. Emmy didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Caleb's words until they wore grooves in her mind. Stay. Not just through spring. Stay. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a disgraced governess answering desperate advertisements. 2 weeks ago, she'd been a stranded stranger in a house of grief. Now, she was being asked to build a life here with a man who was still learning to speak his dead wife's name. It was madness. It was also the first time anyone had wanted her to stay since her father died. Dawn found her in the kitchen, hands deep in bread dough, trying to knead her confusion into something manageable. Nate found her there an hour later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You're up early, Miss Emmy." "Couldn't sleep." "Papa neither. I heard him walking around his room all night." Nate climbed onto his stool, watching her work. "Did something happen?" Emmy's hands stilled. "What makes you ask that?" "Papa looked different when he came out of the sitting room last night. Like he'd been crying, but also like, I don't know. Like he was lighter somehow. We talked about your mother." Nate's eyes widened. He talked about Mama. Really talked. Really talked. The boy was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "That's good. That's real good, Miss Emmy." He reached out and touched her flour-dusted hand. "You're good for him. I knew you would be." Emmy didn't know how to respond to that. Caleb appeared in the doorway, and the air in the kitchen shifted. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, jaw shadowed with stubble, but there was something different in the way he held himself, something less guarded. "Morning," he said, and his eyes found Emmy's. "Morning." The word hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Nate looked between them with barely concealed delight. "I'm gonna go check on Captain. He probably needs to go out." He was gone before either adult could respond. "Subtle," Caleb muttered. "He's 7. He's been trying to play matchmaker since you got here." Caleb moved to the stove, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "About last night." "You don't have to." "I meant what I said." He turned to face her cup, clutched between his palms. "I know I sprung it on you. I know I've got no right to ask anything after how I treated you those first days, but I meant every word." Emmy set down her dough. "Caleb, I've been here 3 weeks. You don't know me. I know you held my son while he cried for his mother. I know you found Sarah's journal and brought it to me instead of reading it yourself. I know you look at Nate like he matters, not like he's a chore to be endured." He set down his cup, stepping closer. "I know you've got more reason than most to be bitter at the world, and instead, you choose kindness. That tells me plenty. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I came here to marry someone else. Because you're still grieving your wife. Because—" She broke off, frustration rising. "Because I can't be a replacement for what you lost. I won't be a substitute for Sarah just because I happen to be here and convenient." The words landed like a slap. Caleb's face went pale. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I don't know what you're doing. That's the problem." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. You're nothing like Sarah. Emmy flinched. I know that. No, you don't understand. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Sarah was soft, gentle. She avoided conflict like it was poison. You push back. You fight. You called me out on my grief when everyone else just tiptoed around it. His jaw tightened. I'm not looking for a replacement, Emmy. I'm looking at you. Her breath caught. I see you, he continued. Not Sarah's ghost, not a convenient solution. You. And I'm asking, not demanding, asking if you'd consider staying. Not as a housekeeper, not as a governess, as... He trailed off, unable to finish. As what? Emmy whispered. As someone who might eventually want to be here. With us. With me. The kitchen door banged open. Nate burst in, captain at his heels, face pale with alarm. Papa Ryder coming fast. Caleb was moving before Nate finished speaking. Emmy followed, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. The rider came over the hill at a gallop, horse lathered and heaving. As he drew closer, Emmy recognized the expensive coat, the silver-handled crop, the arrogant set of the shoulders. Her stomach dropped. Marcus Whitfield reined in hard, his horse dancing and snorting. He was older than she'd expected from his letters, mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair, and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so cold. Miss Harding. His eyes swept over her like she was livestock at auction. You're a difficult woman to find. Mr. Whitfield. Emmy's voice came out steadier than she felt. I was told you'd married. A mistake. One I'm correcting. He dismounted, handing his reins to no one in particular. Caleb caught them, his expression thunderous. The widow proved unsuitable. I've come to collect what's mine. What's yours? You, Miss Harding. We had an arrangement. An arrangement you dissolved when you married another woman. A temporary setback. Whitfield smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. I'm prepared to honor our original agreement. You'll return with me today. Emmy felt Caleb tense beside her. Felt the shift in his body from wary to dangerous. I don't believe Miss Harding wants to go anywhere with you, Caleb said quietly. Whitfield barely glanced at him. This doesn't concern you, Thornton. The lady and I have a contract. Had a contract, which you broke. A technicality. Funny. Woman traveling 2,000 miles only to find her intended married seems more than a technicality to me. Whitfield's smile hardened. I've heard the rumors, Thornton. The stranded bride taking shelter with the lonely widower. People talk. His eyes slid to Emmy. They're saying things about your reputation, Miss Harding. Things that make it harder for a respectable woman to find respectable work. Emmy's hands clenched. And whose fault is that? Does it matter? The point is your options are limited. You can come with me and salvage what's left of your good name, or you can stay here and confirm every sordid suspicion. He spread his hands. I'm offering salvation. You're offering convenience. Emmy snapped. Your temporary wife didn't work out, so you've come to claim the backup. I'm not a spare horse to be collected when the first one goes lame. Whitfield's expression flickered. You have a sharp tongue, Miss Harding. My late wife had a sharp tongue. I thought I'd made it clear in my letters that I value compliance. And I thought you'd made it clear that you were a man of your word. We were both mistaken. The air crackled. Whitfield took a step forward, and Caleb moved smooth and fast, putting himself between Emmy and the other man. Think carefully about your next move, Caleb said softly. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you that the lady said no, and on my land, no means no. They stood face to face, Whitfield tall and polished, Caleb worn and work-hardened. But there was something in Caleb's stillness that made Whitfield hesitate. Something that spoke of violence, held barely in check. This is ridiculous, Whitfield said finally. She has nowhere else to go. No money, no references, no prospects. What exactly do you think you're offering her? That's between Miss Harding and me. Miss Harding? Whitfield laughed an ugly sound. You've been living in his house for weeks. You think anyone's going to call you Miss anything after this? Emmy stepped around Caleb before she could think better of it. I'd rather be ruined and free than respectable and owned by a man who treats promises like suggestions. You broke our contract, Mr. Whitfield. You forfeited any claim to me when you married another woman. I don't care what the territory says about my reputation. I don't care what doors close because I refuse to come crawling back to a man who threw me away. I am not yours. I never was. The silence stretched. Whitfield's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, something that might have been admiration, before settling into cold fury. You'll regret this. I doubt it. When spring comes and you're still here playing house with a man who can barely look at you without seeing his dead wife, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that I offered you a way out, and you spat in my face. And you'll remember that you rode 3 hours through frozen territory to claim a woman who wanted nothing to do with you. Emmy lifted her chin. I'd say we both have things to think about. Whitfield stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, genuine, this time, though no warmer. You're wasted on him, Miss Harding. A woman like you needs a man who can match her fire. He mounted his horse, looking down at them from the saddle. I give it 2 months before she's bored of playing nursemaid to your grief, Thornton. When she comes to her senses, tell her I'm willing to discuss terms. He wheeled his horse and galloped away without waiting for a response. Emmy stood in the frozen yard watching him go and tried to figure out why her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Emmy. She turned. Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm sorry, she said automatically. I should have handled that differently. I shouldn't have what? Stood your ground? Told him exactly what he deserved to hear. Caleb stepped closer, his voice rough. You were magnificent. She stared at him. Magnificent. Do you know how long it's been since I've seen someone stand up to Marcus Whitfield? He owns half the territory. People bow and scrape because they're scared of what he can do to them. And you just... He broke off, something fierce burning in his eyes. You just told him to his face that you'd rather be ruined than be his. I didn't have much choice. He was going to... You had a choice. You could have gone with him, secured your future, played it safe. Caleb's hand came up, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. But you didn't. You chose to stay. You chose us. Caleb. Did you mean it? What you said about rather being ruined and free? Yes. Even knowing what that means, the gossip, the closed doors, I've already survived one scandal I didn't deserve. I can survive another. She covered his hand with hers. And this time, at least, it's for something I actually chose. He was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing her cheekbone. I need to tell you something, he said finally. About why I was there when Sarah died. About why I can't forgive myself. You don't have to. I do. If you're staying, if there's even a chance you're staying, you need to know. He took a breath. Sarah went into labor 3 weeks early. I was supposed to be home, but there was a horse buyer in town. Good money enough to get us through winter. I thought I had time. His voice cracked. By the time I got back, it was almost over. Josie was there and Dr. Monroe, but there was nothing they could do. Baby was breech cord wrapped around her neck. Sarah? He stopped, composing himself. Sarah held on just long enough to see me, to say goodbye. But she wouldn't look at me. Couldn't. She knew I should have been there, and I wasn't. Caleb, you couldn't have known. I should have been there. The words came out raw. My wife died thinking I chose money over her. My daughter died without a father to welcome her. And I have to live with that every day. Emmy's heart shattered. She didn't blame you, she whispered. You don't know that. I know that a woman who loved you enough to wait until you got home, a woman who held on through all that pain just to see your face one more time, that woman didn't die blaming you. She stepped closer, taking his face in both hands. She died loving you, and the only one who's been blaming you for 3 years is you." Something broke in his expression. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, and Emmy felt his shoulders shake with sobs he'd been holding back for 3 years. She held him while he cried, this strong, stubborn man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten there was anything outside them. She held him until the shaking stopped, until his breath steadied, until he finally lifted his head to look at her. "I don't deserve you," he said hoarsely. "Let me decide what you deserve." He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative questioning, but when she pressed closer, something shifted. His arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate, and full of all the loneliness they'd both been carrying. When they finally broke apart, Emmy was trembling. "Well," she managed, "that was—" Papa kissed Miss Emmy. They spun apart. Nate stood in the doorway of the barn, Captain at his heels, face split by the biggest grin Emmy had ever seen. "I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! I knew it!" The boy launched himself across the yard, slamming into both of them hard enough to stagger. "Does this mean she's staying? Does this mean we're a family? Does this mean—" "Slow down, boy." But Caleb was smiling a real smile, one that transformed his face. "One thing at a time." "But Papa, you kissed her. That means you love her, right? That's what kissing means." "It means I'm starting to." Caleb looked at Emmy over his son's head. "If she'll let me." Emmy felt tears prick her eyes. "I think I could be persuaded." Nate squeezed them both tighter. "This is the best day ever. This is even better than Christmas. Can we tell Mrs. Brennan? Can we tell the whole territory? Can we—" "Let's keep it between us for now," Caleb said. "There's still things to figure out." "Like what?" "Like how to do this properly. Your mama would want things done proper." Nate's face grew serious. "Do you think Mama would like Miss Emmy?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I think your mama would like that we're not alone anymore. I think she'd like that someone's teaching you your letters and cooking her recipes and making this house feel alive again." He paused. "I think she'd be happy we found someone to love, even if it took us a while to figure it out." Nate nodded solemnly. "I think so too." They stood there in the frozen yard, man, woman, boy, dog, bound together by something that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. Something fragile and new and full of terrifying possibility. "We should go inside," Emmy said finally. "It's cold." "In a minute." Caleb's arm tightened around her waist. "I just want to stand here a little longer, with my family." Family. The word sent warmth flooding through Emmy's chest. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and she'd ended up here in the arms of a man who'd finally learned to let go of his grief, with a boy who'd stolen her heart from the first moment he grabbed her hand. The wrong ranch had become exactly right. But as they walked back toward the cabin, Emmy caught movement on the distant ridge. A single rider watching. Too far to identify, but close enough to be seen. Then the figure turned and disappeared over the hill. Emmy told herself it was nothing. But the cold that ran down her spine had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. That evening, Josie Brennan arrived without invitation. She stood in the doorway, taking in the changed atmosphere, Caleb and Emmy sitting closer than before, Nate chattering happily between them, something new and warm filling the spaces that had been cold for so long. "So," Josie said. "It's done then." Caleb rose. "Josie, don't." She held up a hand. "I'm not here to scold. I'm here to tell you something I should have told you 3 years ago." She moved to Sarah's chair, the chair Caleb had finally started sitting in again, and lowered herself into it, with the weight of old age and old grief. "Sarah made me promise." "Promise what?" "On her deathbed, between contractions. She grabbed my hand and made me swear." Josie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She knew something was wrong. She could feel it. And she made me promise that when you finally found someone, not if when I wouldn't let you destroy it with guilt." Caleb went very still. She said you'd blame yourself. She said you'd think she'd want you to grieve forever. And she made me promise to tell you. Josie's voice cracked. To tell you that she died grateful. Grateful for every day she had with you. Grateful for Nate. Grateful that her last sight was your face, because that's what she wanted. Not to make you feel guilty, because she loved you and she wanted you to be the last thing she saw. The cabin went silent. Emmy watched Caleb's face, the shock, the disbelief, the slow crumbling of the wall he'd built around the worst of his guilt. She wasn't angry, he whispered. She was never angry. She was tired and scared and in more pain than anyone should ever have to bear. But she wasn't angry. Not at you. Josie reached out, taking Caleb's hand. The only thing that ever made Sarah angry was the thought of you closing yourself off from love. She made me promise to stop that. And I've been a coward, waiting for the right moment, when I should have told you years ago. Why now? Josie glanced at Emmy. Because now there's a reason. Now there's someone worth fighting your demons for. She stood, patting Caleb's hand. Don't waste this, Caleb Thornton. Sarah wouldn't forgive either of us if you did. She left without another word. Caleb stood frozen, hand still outstretched where Josie had released it. Caleb. Emmy touched his arm. He turned to her and she saw something she hadn't seen before. Peace. Not complete, not healed, but the beginning of peace, like the first crack of dawn after endless night. She wasn't angry, he said wonderingly. She wasn't angry. No. All this time I thought... He shook his head. I thought she died hating me. I thought I'd failed her so badly that she couldn't even look at me at the end. And instead, she loved you until her last breath, and she wanted you to love again. Caleb pulled Emmy against him, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him upright. I don't know if I deserve this, he said into her hair. But I'm done running from it. I'm done being scared. Papa? Nate's small voice came from behind them. Are you okay? Caleb released Emmy enough to open his arm to his son. Nate burrowed against his side, looking up at both adults with worried eyes. I'm okay, boy. For the first time in 3 years, I think I'm really okay. Because of Miss Emmy. Because of a lot of things. You, Miss Emmy. Mrs. Brennan finally telling me what your mama wanted me to know. He squeezed his son tight. Your mama wasn't angry when she died. She was happy. She wanted us to be happy too. Nate's face lit up. Really? Really. Then we should be happy. Really, really happy. All the time. Emmy laughed, surprised by the joy bubbling up in her chest. That might be hard to manage. We can try, Nate said firmly. Mama would want us to try. Caleb looked at Emmy over his son's head, and something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance, the first fragile threads of a future together. Yeah, he said softly. Your mama would want exactly that. The days leading to Thanksgiving passed in a blur of preparation and growing warmth. Emmy taught Nate to make his mother's cornbread dressing, following Sarah's handwriting in the recipe book, step by careful step. Caleb brought home a turkey from town, along with supplies for the feast, and a length of blue ribbon that he pressed into Emmy's hands without explanation. For your hair, he said gruffly when she stared at him in confusion. Sarah always wore blue ribbons on holidays. Nate remembered. Emmy looked at the boy who was watching with barely contained excitement. You picked this color? It matches your eyes. Nate bounced on his toes. Well, almost. Your eyes are more gray-blue, but the lady at the store didn't have gray-blue, so I picked the closest thing. Emmy blinked back sudden tears. It's perfect. You'll wear it for Thanksgiving. I'll wear it. Nate whooped and threw himself at her. Over his head, Emmy caught Caleb's eye, and the warmth she saw there made her chest ache with something dangerously close to hope. But the peace couldn't last. The morning before Thanksgiving, a rider came. Emmy was kneading bread when she heard the hoofbeats fast and urgent, not the leisurely pace of a neighbor dropping by. Captain started barking before the horse cleared the hill. Caleb was already moving. "Stay inside." "Caleb, both of you, stay." He grabbed his rifle from above the door and stepped onto the porch. Emmy pulled Nate behind her, watching through the window as a young man on a lathered horse reined in hard. "Mr. Thornton." The rider was barely more than a boy, face red with cold. "Mrs. Brennan sent me. There's trouble at the Henderson place." Henderson. Whitfield's nearest neighbor. Emmy's stomach clenched. "What kind of trouble?" "Mrs. Henderson's having her baby. Something's wrong. Mrs. Brennan's been there all night, but she says she needs help. The doctor's gone to Cheyenne, won't be back for 3 days. What does she expect me to do?" "Not you, sir." The boy's eyes went to the window to Emmy standing there with Nate behind her. "Her. Mrs. Brennan says the lady staying with you used to work with a midwife back east. Says she needs someone who's seen difficult births before." Emmy's blood ran cold. It was true she'd assisted Mrs. Kramer the midwife in their Boston neighborhood through dozens of births during her teens. She'd learned to recognize the signs of trouble to stay calm when blood came too fast or babies came too slow. But she hadn't done it in years. And if something went wrong, Emmy... Caleb stood in the doorway, face unreadable. "You don't have to go. If Mrs. Brennan is asking for help..." Josie's handled difficult births before. She delivered Nate when he came early. She doesn't need... She wouldn't ask if she didn't need. Emmy was already reaching for her coat. "How far is the Henderson place?" 2 hours. Maybe less if the roads are clear." "Then I'm going." "Emmy." She turned to face him, and something in her expression made him stop. "I spent years watching other people suffer because I was too afraid to help. I let my father's death make me small, make me careful, make me hide from anything that might hurt." She pulled on her coat with shaking hands. "I'm done hiding. If there's a chance I can help that woman, I'm going." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, something fierce and proud in his eyes. "I'm coming with you." "But Nate, Mrs. Brennan's boy can stay with him. Can't you, son?" The young rider nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. Happy to help." Nate grabbed Emmy's hand. "You'll come back, right? You promise?" Emmy knelt, pulling him close. "I promise. I'll be back before the turkey goes in the oven." "What if something happens?" "Then your papa will bring me home anyway." She kissed his forehead. "Be brave for me. Can you do that?" Nate nodded, chin wobbling. Emmy stood and Caleb's hand found hers. "Let's go." The ride to Henderson's was brutal. Wind cut through Emmy's coat like it wasn't there. Her fingers went numb despite her gloves, and by the time they reached the ranch, she could barely feel her face. But none of that mattered when Josie Brennan met them at the door. "Thank God." The older woman grabbed Emmy's arm, pulling her inside. "She's been laboring for 18 hours. Baby won't turn. I've tried everything I know." "What about, if we don't get that baby out in the next hour, we're going to lose them both?" Emmy's heart stopped. "Show me." The bedroom was too hot after the frozen ride, heavy with the smell of blood and sweat and fear. Mrs. Henderson, young, barely 20, with dark hair plastered to her pale face, lay in the bed, barely conscious. Her husband stood in the corner, face gray with terror. "Can you help her?" "Please, she's all I've got. I can't..." "Wait outside," Emmy said, stripping off her coat. "Both of you, give me room to work." "But..." "Now." Caleb took Henderson's arm. "Come on, let the women work." When the door closed, Emmy turned to Josie. "Tell me everything." Josie talked fast while Emmy examined the laboring woman. Breech presentation. Baby stuck. Mrs. Henderson had lost too much blood already, and her pulse was thready and weak. "I've done everything I know," Josie said, voice cracking. "If you can't, I can." Emmy didn't know if it was true, but the certainty in her voice seemed to steady the older woman. I watched Mrs. Kramer turn 3 breech babies. I know the technique, but I'm going to need your help. Anything. Keep her calm, keep her conscious, and when I tell you to push, you make sure she pushes. For the next 45 minutes, Emmy worked with hands she'd forgotten she had. The knowledge came back in pieces. Pressure here, turn there, the careful manipulation of a tiny body that didn't want to move. Mrs. Henderson screamed. She begged. She cursed Emmy's name with words Emmy had never heard a lady use. But she pushed when Josie told her to push. And finally, a tiny cry split the air. "It's a girl!" Emmy held the squalling infant hands, shaking, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect," Mrs. Henderson sobbed. Josie was crying too, taking the baby to clean and wrap, while Emmy finished her work. When it was done, when mother and daughter were both stable, both breathing, both going to live, Emmy walked out of the bedroom on legs that wouldn't stop trembling. Caleb was waiting. He caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest while she shook with the aftermath of what she'd just done. "You saved them." His voice was rough against her hair. "Both of them." "I almost couldn't. If I'd been a minute slower. But you weren't. You were exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed you." He pulled back, cupping her face in both hands. "Do you understand what you just did?" Emmy shook her head, too exhausted for words. "You gave that little girl a mother. You gave Henderson his wife. You—" His voice broke. "You did what no one could do for Sarah. And I know it's not the same. I know it doesn't bring her back, but—" "Stop." Emmy pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't make this about what you lost. This is about what we saved today. A family. A new life. That's enough." Caleb kissed her fingers. "More than enough." Henderson appeared in the doorway, face streaked with tears. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to ever—" "Name her something beautiful," Emmy said. "That's thanks enough." "Sarah." Henderson's voice caught. "We're naming her Sarah. After the woman Josie says taught this territory how to love their neighbors." Emmy felt Caleb go still beside her. "Sarah Henderson," she repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name." Caleb's hand found hers and squeezed tight enough to hurt. The ride home was quieter. The wind had died, and the sun was setting in colors Emmy had never seen in Boston. Orange and pink and purple, blazing across a sky so vast it made her feel like she could see forever. Caleb rode close beside her, silent but present. "You're thinking about her," Emmy said finally. "About Sarah." "I'm thinking about a lot of things." "Tell me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm thinking about how I spent 3 years being angry at God for taking her. How I blamed myself, blamed the territory, blamed everyone, except the one person who deserved it." "Who was that?" "No one." He looked at her eyes bright in the fading light. "That's the thing. There wasn't anyone to blame. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no reason for it, and no one's at fault. Sometimes people just die and the ones left behind have to figure out how to keep living." "Is that what you're doing? Figuring out how to keep living?" "No." He reined in his horse, stopping in the middle of the frozen road. Emmy stopped beside him, confused. "I'm not figuring out how to keep living. I'm figuring out how to start again." He dismounted and came to her horse's side, reaching up to help her down. "With you. If you'll let me." Emmy's heart hammered. "Caleb. I know we said we'd take it slow. I know there's still things to work out. But watching you today, watching you save that woman and her baby, watching you do something I couldn't do for my own wife—" His voice cracked. "I realized I don't want to waste any more time. I've wasted 3 years already." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out rough, desperate, certain. "I love the way you stand up to me when I'm being a fool. I love how you hold my son when he's sad. I love that you found my wife's journal and gave it back to me instead of keeping it to yourself. I love—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I love everything about you, Emmy Harding. And I know I'm not what you came west looking for. I know I'm broken in ways that might never heal completely. But if you'll have me, if you'll let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you, I swear I'll never give you reason to regret it." Emmy stared at him, this man who'd been so cold when she arrived, so walled off and guarded. The man who'd gradually thawed piece by piece, until the warmth underneath shone through like sunlight through ice. "You love me," she whispered. "I love you. Even knowing what people say about me. The scandal, I don't care what people say, I care what's true. And what's true is that you're the best thing that's happened to this family since we lost Sarah." Emmy felt tears spilling down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "I love you too." Caleb's face transformed. The hard lines softened. The shadows lifted, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked young, unburdened, free. "Say it again." "I love you." She laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep. "I love you, Caleb Thornton. God knows why you were terrible to me when I first arrived. I was scared." "You were awful." "I was that too." He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her waist. "But I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for it, starting now." He kissed her slow and thorough, the kind of kiss that made promises and meant them. When they finally broke apart, Emmy was breathless. "We should get home," she managed. "Nate's waiting." "Nate can wait 5 more minutes." "Caleb," I said. He kissed her again. 5 more minutes. They were late getting home, but when they finally rode into the yard, Nate was bouncing on the porch despite the cold, Captain barking beside him. "You're back. You're back." He launched himself off the porch and into Emmy's arms before she'd fully dismounted. "Mrs. Brennan's boy said you saved a lady and a baby. He said you were a hero." "I don't know about hero." "You are. You totally are." Nate squeezed her tight. "Papa isn't Miss Emmy a hero." Caleb's hand found Emmy's shoulder. "Yeah, son, she is. And you're gonna marry her now, right? Because you love her." Emmy and Caleb exchanged glances. "How did you know?" "I'm 7, not stupid." Nate rolled his eyes with all the wisdom of his years. "So, are you gonna marry her?" Caleb looked at Emmy, a question in his eyes. She answered it by taking his hand. "I think," Caleb said slowly, "that we ought to discuss it properly, over Thanksgiving dinner, as a family." Nate's whoop could probably be heard in the next territory. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold and perfect. Emmy woke to the smell of coffee already brewing and found Caleb in the kitchen attempting to peel potatoes with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. "You're supposed to be resting," she said. "Couldn't sleep." He looked up, and the smile he gave her made her heart flip. Too much to be thankful for. That was corny. That was honest. He set down the potato and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Morning." "Morning." They stood like that for a moment, wrapped in warmth and possibility, until a small voice interrupted. "Are you two gonna be like this all day because I'm hungry?" Emmy laughed against Caleb's chest. "Some things don't change." "Some things do." Caleb kissed her forehead. "For the better." They cooked together, all 3 of them, plus Captain supervising from his spot by the fire. Nate stirred and measured and tasted solemnly, overseeing Emmy's execution of his mother's recipes. Caleb peeled vegetables and carved the turkey and snuck pieces of stuffing when he thought no one was looking. By early afternoon, the table was set with Sarah's dishes and food covered every inch of available surface. Caleb took his seat at the head of the table, the seat he'd avoided for 3 years, and looked at the people gathered around him. "I reckon we should say grace." "Can I do it?" Nate asked. "Like last year?" Go ahead, son. Nate bowed his head, face serious. Dear God, thank you for this food. Thank you for Papa and for Captain. Thank you for bringing Miss Emmy to the wrong ranch because it turned out to be the right one. He paused. Thank you for Mama watching over us from heaven. I know she's happy that we're not sad anymore. Amen. Emmy wiped her eyes. Caleb's jaw was tight with emotion. Amen, he said roughly. Now let's eat before it gets cold. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore. They talked about everything and nothing. Nate's lessons, the horses the coming winter, the spring that would follow. They laughed at Nate's jokes and groaned at Caleb's. They told stories about Sarah, and for the first time the stories brought smiles instead of tears. After dinner, when Nate was drowsing by the fire with Captain curled at his feet, Caleb took Emmy's hand. There's something I want to show you. He led her to the small chest in the corner of the bedroom, Sarah's jewelry box, which Emmy had seen but never touched. Caleb, you don't have to. I want to. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small blue stone. This was Sarah's. Her mother's before that. She'd want Nate's wife to have it someday. He paused. But I think she'd understand if I gave it to someone sooner. Emmy's breath caught. Marry me, Emmy. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. Not because it's convenient. Not because Nate needs a mother. Because I love you, and I can't imagine facing another day without you in it. Yes. The word came out before she could think. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Christmas Eve, she said. Let's get married on Christmas Eve. That's barely a month away. I know. She kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. I don't want to wait any longer than we have to. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Christmas Eve it is. From the main room, Nate's sleepy voice drifted in. Does this mean I get a mama for Christmas? Emmy laughed against Caleb's shoulder. Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what it means. Best present ever. The days after Thanksgiving flew past in a whirl of preparation. Josie Brennan took charge of organizing the wedding with a ferocity that left Emmy slightly terrified. The older woman had arrived the morning after Thanksgiving, taken one look at the ring on Emmy's finger, and burst into tears. About damn time, she'd said, hugging Emmy hard enough to crack ribs. Sarah would be so happy. You think so? I know so. Josie pulled back, wiping her eyes. Now, let's plan a wedding. Word spread through the territory faster than wildfire. Neighbors Emmy had never met appeared with gifts, preserves, quilts, practical items for a frontier household. The women looked at her with a mix of curiosity and approval. The men shook Caleb's hand and clapped his shoulder and said it was good to see him smiling again. Even Henderson's wife sent word from her recovery bed thanking Emmy for saving her life and inviting them to bring baby Sarah to the wedding so she could meet her namesake in spirit. But not everyone was happy. 3 days before Christmas, Marcus Whitfield's lawyer arrived. Emmy was hanging holly when the fancy carriage pulled into the yard. She knew it was trouble before the man even stepped out. His kind of polish didn't belong in this territory. Miss Harding. The lawyer was thin-pinched with the look of someone who'd bitten into something sour. I have documents regarding your pending marriage. What kind of documents? Mr. Whitfield wishes to inform you that he intends to sue for breach of contract. The lawyer thrust a sheaf of papers at her. Your original agreement specified exclusivity. By entering into an engagement with Mr. Thornton, you violated the terms of your arrangement. Emmy stared at the papers, anger rising like bile. The arrangement was dissolved when he married another woman. That marriage has been annulled. Legally, your original contract is once again binding. That's ridiculous. That's the law, Miss Harding. Mr. Whitfield is prepared to pursue this matter through the territorial courts. The scandal alone would be considerable. Caleb appeared in the doorway. What's going on? Whitfield's suing me for breach of contract. Emmy's voice shook with fury. He's trying to stop the wedding. Caleb's face went hard. Get off my land. Mr. Thornton, I'm simply delivering. I said get off my land. Caleb stepped forward, and something in his movement made the lawyer stumble backward. And you can tell Whitfield that if he thinks some piece of paper is going to stop me from marrying this woman, he's got another thing coming. The courts will decide. The courts can go hang. Now get. The lawyer fled. Emmy stood in the yard, papers crumpling in her fist, watching the carriage disappear over the hill. He won't stop, she said quietly. Whitfield. He'll keep pushing until what? Caleb took her face in his hands. Until we give up, until we let him win. That's not happening. But the scandal. I don't care about scandal. The courts. I don't care about courts. His grip tightened. Listen to me. We are getting married on Christmas Eve. Whitfield and his lawyers and the entire territorial government can object all they want. It's not going to change anything. How can you be so sure? Because I spent 3 years being scared of everything. Scared of loving again, scared of losing again, scared of what people might think or say or do. His voice softened. And then you showed up at the wrong ranch and taught me that being scared was worse than any risk I might take. I'm done being scared, Emmy. I'm done letting fear run my life. Emmy felt tears pricking her eyes. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Trouble was already at my door. Loneliness, grief, a house so full of sadness my son forgot how to laugh. He kissed her forehead. You brought joy, not trouble, and I'll fight Whitfield and anyone else who tries to take that away. Nate appeared beside them, having snuck out without them noticing. Is the bad man trying to stop the wedding? Caleb looked at his son. He's trying. He won't succeed. Good. Nate's jaw set with determination. Because I already told everyone at church that I'm getting a mama for Christmas, and I don't want to be a liar. Emmy laughed despite everything. We wouldn't want that. No, ma'am. Nate grabbed both their hands. So we're still getting married. We're still getting married, Caleb confirmed. On Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve. Nate nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, can we finish decorating? The holly's not going to hang itself. They finished hanging the holly. And when Christmas Eve dawned bright and cold and perfect, Emmy woke to find Caleb already gone banished to the barn by Josie, who had arrived before dawn to help Emmy prepare. It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, Josie said, fastening the blue ribbon into Emmy's hair. Even in a territory this uncivilized, some traditions matter. Do you think he'll come, Whitfield? He'd be a fool to try. Josie's eyes hardened. Half the territory's coming to this wedding. If he shows up making trouble, he'll have bigger problems than a breach of contract. Emmy looked at herself in the small mirror. The dress was simple. Her best gray wool freshened and pressed, but with Sarah's ring on her finger and Sarah's blue ribbon in her hair, she felt beautiful. She'd be happy, Josie said quietly. Sarah, seeing you here, seeing her family whole again, she'd be so happy. Emmy's eyes burned. I hope I can make them as happy as she did. You already have. Josie squeezed her shoulder. Now, let's go get you married. The ceremony was small and perfect. Reverend Ashby stood before the fireplace, Bible in hand. Neighbors crowded the cabin, spilling onto the porch despite the cold. Mrs. Henderson held baby Sarah, beaming through happy tears. And Caleb waited by the fire, Nate at his side, watching Emmy walk toward him like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared to speak. Dearly beloved, Reverend Ashby began, we are gathered here to witness the union of Caleb James Thornton and Emmeline Grace Harding. The words washed over Emmy like music. She barely heard them, too focused on Caleb's eyes. Caleb's hands holding hers. Caleb's voice saying, I do, with a certainty that made her heart soar. Do you, Emmeline, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. The words came out strong and sure. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Ashby smiled. You may kiss your bride. Caleb kissed her, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Nate launched himself at them both, wrapping his arms around their waists. We're a family now. A real family. The realest, Emmy agreed, laughing through tears. Forever and ever. Caleb looked at Emmy over his son's head. Forever and ever. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing. Caleb proving unexpectedly light on his feet and more joy than the Thornwood Ranch had seen in 3 years. But eventually, the neighbors departed, calling blessings and good wishes into the cold night. Eventually, Nate fell asleep by the fire, exhausted by happiness. Eventually, Caleb carried his son to bed, while Emmy stood at the window watching stars blaze across the endless Wyoming sky, arms wrapped around her from behind. Mrs. Thornton, Caleb murmured against her hair. Mr. Thornton, how does it feel? Emmy leaned back against him, feeling his warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart. Like home, she said. It feels like home. The first morning of her married life, Emmy woke to an empty bed. Panic seized her for one terrible moment, the old fear that happiness was only ever borrowed, that it could be snatched away without warning. Then she heard voices from the kitchen, and the smell of burning coffee drifted through the door. She found Caleb and Nate standing over the stove, both wearing matching expressions of concern. I think we killed it, Nate said solemnly. It's just coffee, boy. You can't kill coffee. Then why is it smoking? Emmy laughed, and both of them spun around with guilty faces. We were trying to bring you breakfast in bed, Caleb admitted. It's not going well. I can see that. Emmy rescued the coffee pot, dumping the contents before they could cause any more damage. Were you planning to burn down the house on our first day as a family? That was Plan B. Caleb's arms slipped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Plan A was making you feel special. I already feel special. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. I don't need burnt coffee to prove it. Ew. Nate made a face. Are you going to be like this all the time now? Probably, Caleb said, not releasing Emmy. Definitely. Emmy agreed. Nate sighed with the long-suffering patience of a 7-year-old. Fine, but can we have breakfast first? I'm starving. They made breakfast together properly, this time with Emmy supervising and Caleb learning to crack eggs without getting shell everywhere. Nate set the table with Sarah's dishes, handling them with the reverence they deserved. Mama used these for special occasions, he explained to Emmy. Christmas, Easter, birthdays. And now every day is special, he grinned, because you're here. Emmy's heart swelled until it hurt. After breakfast, Caleb took her hand. There's somewhere I want to take you. He led her outside, Nate and Captain trailing behind up the hill to where Sarah's grave stood against the winter sky. Emmy had been here once before, but never with Caleb beside her, never as his wife. I wanted to introduce you, Caleb said quietly. Properly. He knelt by the wooden cross, one hand resting on the frozen earth. Sarah, this is Emmy. I know you've been watching over us. Nate says he can feel you sometimes, but I wanted to make it official. His voice roughened. She's part of our family now. She's taking care of our boy, taking care of me. And I think... He swallowed hard. I think you sent her. I think you knew we needed someone, and you made sure she found her way to us. Emmy wiped tears from her cheeks. I'll never forget you, Caleb continued. You were my first love, the mother of my son, the woman who taught me what it meant to build a life with someone. But Emmy's teaching me something different. She's teaching me that love doesn't run out, that the heart makes room for whoever it needs to hold. He stood reaching for Emmy's hand. Say something. To her. Emmy hesitated, then knelt where Caleb had been. The earth was cold through her skirts, but she didn't move. I never knew you, she said softly. But I feel like I do. Through Nate's stories, through Caleb's memories, through the recipes in your cookbook and the journal you left behind. She traced the letters of Sarah's name on the cross. I promise I'll never try to replace you. I promise I'll keep your memory alive for Nate and help Caleb remember you with joy instead of pain. And I promise. Her voice broke. I promise, I'll love them as fiercely as you did. They deserve nothing less. She felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. Come on, he said gently. Let's go home. Home. The word tasted different now. Sweeter, more certain. They walked back down the hill together, husband, wife, son, dog, the beginning of something new built on the foundation of everything that had come before. The trouble came on New Year's Day. Emmy was teaching Nate his letters when hoofbeats thundered into the yard, not one horse this time, but several. Captain's barking held a note of alarm she'd never heard before. Caleb was at the door before she could stand. Stay inside. Caleb. Emmy, please, keep Nate with you. He stepped onto the porch, and Emmy moved to the window, pulling Nate behind her. 6 riders. Whitfield at the front, his lawyer beside him, 4 men. Emmy didn't recognize flanking them. They weren't carrying weapons openly, but something about their posture made her skin crawl. Thornton. Whitfield's voice carried across the frozen yard. I've come to discuss terms. There's nothing to discuss. My wife and I aren't interested in your lawsuits or your threats. Your wife. Whitfield laughed an ugly sound. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? She's your wife now, which makes the breach of contract even more egregious. He pulled a paper from his coat. I have a court order. Miss Harding, excuse me. Mrs. Thornton is to appear before the territorial judge to answer charges of fraud, breach of contract, and... He smiled. Bigamy. Bigamy. Emmy's blood went cold. She was legally contracted to marry me. By marrying you instead, she's committed bigamy. The penalty, I'm told, is rather severe. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. That's ridiculous. She was never married to you. The contract stipulated exclusivity. In the eyes of the law, that creates a binding premarital arrangement. Her subsequent marriage to you is therefore invalid. Whitfield's smile widened. Which means she's currently living in sin with a man who isn't her legal husband. The scandal alone should be enough to destroy whatever reputation she has left. Emmy's legs wouldn't hold her. She sank into a chair, mind racing. This couldn't be legal. It couldn't be real. She'd seen the contract she signed. It was standard language, nothing about premarital binding or exclusivity clauses. But Whitfield had money. Whitfield had lawyers. Whitfield had power in this territory that she and Caleb could never match. Get off my land. Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. I'm simply serving legal notice. Mrs. Thornton has 1 week to appear before the court. If she fails to appear, a warrant will be issued for her arrest. Whitfield gathered his reins. I'd advise her to start packing. One way or another, she's leaving this ranch. He wheeled his horse and rode away, his men following. Emmy sat frozen. Nate clutching her hand while the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. Caleb didn't come inside immediately. Emmy watched through the window as he stood in the yard, shoulders rigid, staring at the horizon where Whitfield had disappeared. When he finally entered, his face was carved from stone. We'll fight it. How? Emmy's voice came out hollow. He has lawyers, money, connections. We have each other. We have the truth. Caleb knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. Listen to me. I don't care what papers he waves around. I don't care what judges he's bought. You're my wife, Nate's mother. And no one is taking you away from us. He'll destroy us. Let him try. Nate pressed closer to Emmy's side. Papa, what's bigamy? A lie. Caleb's jaw tightened. Whitfield's lying to try and take Emmy away, but we're not going to let him. How? Caleb looked at Emmy, and something fierce burned in his eyes. By telling the truth, to everyone who'll listen. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Caleb rode to town, returning with Josie Brennan and Henderson and a dozen other neighbors who'd come to the wedding. They gathered in the Thornwood cabin, faces grim with determination. "Whitfield's overreached," Henderson said. "This bigamy charge, it's nonsense. Anyone with eyes can see that contract wasn't meant to be legally binding." "Doesn't matter what it was meant to be," Josie said darkly. "Whitfield's got Judge Morrison in his pocket. Has for years. If this goes to court, Emmy loses." "Then we don't let it go to court." Mrs. Henderson, baby Sarah in her arms, spoke up for the first time. "We make it too costly for him to pursue." "How?" Emmy asked. "Reputation." Mrs. Henderson's eyes glittered. "Whitfield cares about one thing above all else: how he's seen by the territory. Right now, he thinks he can paint you as the villain, the woman who broke a contract, who married another man while legally bound. But what if we paint a different picture?" "What kind of picture?" "The truth. A woman abandoned by a man who married someone else without warning. A woman stranded with no money and no options. A woman taken in by a grieving widower and his motherless son." Mrs. Henderson smiled grimly. "A woman who saved my life and my daughter's life when the doctor was gone and the midwife couldn't manage alone." "The whole territory knows that story," Henderson added. "Everyone's talking about it. The Boston governess who delivered a breech baby in a snowstorm. If Whitfield tries to drag you through the courts, every woman in Wyoming will be on your side." "And their husbands," Josie said. "No man wants to think about what might have happened to his wife or children without someone willing to help." Emmy looked at these people, neighbors she barely knew, who'd come out in the bitter cold to defend a woman they'd met only weeks ago. Her throat tightened. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. You saved my wife." Henderson's voice was rough. "You gave my daughter a chance to live. That's not nothing, Mrs. Thornton. That's everything." Josie reached over and took Emmy's hand. "Sarah would have done the same for any of us. And you're Sarah's family now, whether you knew her or not." The plan was simple: make Whitfield's pursuit so publicly shameful that he'd be forced to abandon it. They started with the church. Reverend Ashby, who'd married Caleb and Emmy just days before, stood before his congregation and spoke about compassion, about welcoming strangers, about the dangers of powerful men abusing the law to punish women who refused their advances. He never mentioned Whitfield by name. He didn't have to. Next came the Women's Auxiliary. Mrs. Henderson organized a letter-writing campaign, dozens of women from across the territory sending testimonials about Emmy's character, her kindness, her skill. The letters went to the territorial governor, to the newspapers, to anyone with influence. The story spread like wildfire. The heartless rancher who'd abandoned his mail-order bride then tried to claim her back when his second marriage failed. The brave woman who'd saved lives while facing persecution. The grieving widower and his motherless son, who'd finally found happiness, only to have it threatened by a jealous man's wounded pride. By the end of the week, Whitfield's name had become synonymous with cruelty throughout the territory. The morning of the court date, Emmy dressed in her best gray wool, Sarah's ring on her finger, and Sarah's blue ribbon in her hair. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, but her spine was steel. "You don't have to do this alone." Caleb appeared in the doorway, already dressed for town. "I'll be right beside you the whole time." "I know. And if the judge rules against us, he won't. But if he does..." Emmy turned to face him. "Then we'll fight. We'll appeal. We'll take it all the way to the territorial governor if we have to." She crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. "I didn't come 2,000 miles and find the love of my life just to give up now. Whatever happens today, we face it together." Caleb kissed her fierce and quick. Together. The courtroom was packed. Emmy had expected a small hearing, just her, Caleb, Whitfield, and the judge. Instead, she found every seat filled. Neighbors she recognized, Strangers, she didn't. Women clutching handkerchiefs, men with arms crossed and jaws set. Josie Brennan sat in the front row, Mrs. Henderson beside her, with baby Sarah sleeping in her arms. Henderson stood against the back wall with a dozen other ranchers, their presence a silent threat to anyone who might try to render an unjust verdict. Judge Morrison looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Order," he called, banging his gavel. "This court is now in session. The matter of Whitfield versus Harding." "Thornton," Emmy corrected quietly. "My name is Emmeline Thornton." The judge's eyes narrowed. "The matter of Whitfield versus the defendant. Mr. Whitfield, please state your case." Whitfield's lawyer rose, launching into a convoluted argument about contracts and legal obligations, and the sanctity of premarital agreements. Emmy listened with growing disbelief. The claims were outrageous, twisting language, inventing clauses, painting her as a calculating fortune hunter who'd played two men against each other. When the lawyer finished, the judge turned to Emmy. "Does the defendant wish to respond?" Emmy stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice was clear. "Your Honor, I came to this territory with nothing but a carpetbag and a letter promising a new start. I was told Mr. Whitfield was a respectable man, seeking an honest partnership. I was not told he would marry another woman without informing me, leaving me stranded with no money and no way home." She took a breath. "I was taken in by Mr. Thornton and his son out of Christian charity. I earned my keep by teaching and cooking and helping with the house. When I learned that Mr. Whitfield had married, I considered my agreement with him dissolved as any reasonable person would." "The contract," Whitfield's lawyer began. "The contract said nothing about exclusivity or premarital binding. I have the original document here." Emmy pulled the letter from her pocket. "Mr. Whitfield may have fabricated clauses after the fact, but the agreement I signed was simple. I would travel west, meet him, and if we suited, we would marry. He married someone else. We never met. The contract was void the moment he said, 'I do,' to another woman." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge's face was unreadable. "As for the charge of bigamy," Emmy's voice hardened. "It's absurd. I was never married to Mr. Whitfield. I was never engaged to Mr. Whitfield. I was a stranger answering an advertisement, nothing more. To claim that this creates a legal marriage is to claim that every woman who answers such an advertisement is bound for life to a man she's never met." She looked at the packed courtroom, at the women watching with hope in their eyes. "If this court rules that such a thing is legal, that a man can claim ownership of a woman simply by placing an advertisement, then no woman in this territory is safe. Any man could advertise for a bride, then use the response to bind her legally against her will." The murmur grew louder. Several women nodded fiercely. The ranchers against the back wall shifted their weight, their presence suddenly more threatening. Judge Morrison's face had gone pale. "Your Honor," Whitfield's lawyer said desperately, "the contract clearly states, the contract states nothing of the kind." A new voice cut through the courtroom. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway, elegant, dark-haired, dressed in traveling clothes that spoke of wealth and haste. She strode forward, ignoring the stares, and handed the judge a sheaf of papers. "My name is Catherine Whitfield. I was Marcus Whitfield's wife for exactly 3 weeks before I discovered the truth about his character." Her voice was ice. "These documents include letters from 7 other women he's done this to. Advertised for a bride, had them travel west, then threatened them with fabricated legal claims when they refused his advances." The courtroom erupted. Emmy stared at the woman in shock. Whitfield had gone white as milk, his lawyer sputtering objections that no one could hear over the chaos. "Order, order!" Judge Morrison banged his gavel frantically. "I'm not finished." Catherine Whitfield's voice cut through the noise. "I'm also prepared to testify that Marcus Whitfield showed me the original contract with Mrs. Thornton. There was no exclusivity clause, no premarital binding. He added those sections after she married Mr. Thornton specifically to destroy her new marriage." "That's a lie." Whitfield was on his feet, face purple with rage. She's a bitter woman trying to— I have the original contract, the one he kept in his safe before he altered it. Catherine held up another paper. Compare the handwriting, compare the ink. Any fool can see the additions were made later. Judge Morrison took both documents, studying them with growing alarm. The courtroom waited. Finally, the judge looked up. His face was gray. Case dismissed. The charges against Mrs. Thornton are without merit. He turned to Whitfield with something approaching disgust. Mr. Whitfield, I suggest you leave this territory before I find grounds to bring charges against you. The crowd erupted in cheers. Emmy sagged against Caleb, who caught her and held her tight. Nate appeared from somewhere, throwing himself at them both. Captain barked joyously, adding to the chaos. It's over. Caleb's voice was rough against her hair. It's finally over. I can't believe that woman. Sometimes justice finds a way. He pulled back, cupping her face. You're free. We're free. Emmy kissed him, not caring who saw. The celebration lasted all day. Neighbors filled the Thornwood cabin, bringing food and drink and joy. Josie Brennan laughed louder than anyone had heard her laugh in years. Henderson kept refilling cups and telling anyone who'd listen about the moment. Whitfield's face went white. Baby Sarah was passed from arms to arms, cooed over and blessed. Catherine Whitfield stayed long enough to explain. She'd suspected her husband's character within days of their wedding and had spent the weeks since gathering evidence. When she heard about Emmy's case, she'd traveled 3 days straight to deliver her testimony. Why? Emmy asked. You don't know me. I know what it is to be trapped by a man who sees women as property. Catherine's smile was sad. And I know that the only way to stop men like Marcus is for women like us to stand together. She left before evening, refusing all offers of hospitality. Emmy watched her carriage disappear and felt something shift in her understanding of the world. A recognition that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes salvation arrived from unexpected places. That night, when the last neighbor had gone and Nate had fallen asleep by the fire, Caleb took Emmy's hand. Walk with me. They climbed the hill to Sarah's grave, the same path they'd walked on their first morning as husband and wife. The stars blazed overhead, brilliant and countless, and the snow glittered like scattered diamonds. Caleb stopped at the wooden cross, but this time he didn't kneel. I think she's at peace now, he said quietly. I think she was waiting to see that we'd be okay. And now she knows. Emmy leaned against his shoulder. How do you know? I feel it. That weight I've been carrying for 3 years, the guilt, the grief, the fear, it's lighter now. Not gone, maybe, but lighter. He turned to face her. You did that. You and Nate and everyone who came today. You reminded me that love isn't about holding on to what's lost. It's about building something new. We built something good. We built something beautiful. He kissed her forehead. A family, a home, a future. Emmy looked at the grave at the cabin below where their sons slept at the vast and wild territory that had somehow become hers. I came here looking for safety, she said. A place to belong. A life that made sense. Did you find it? She smiled. I found something better. I found love. Caleb's arms tightened around her. So did I. They stood together in the starlight, two people who had been lost and broken and afraid, now whole and healed and brave. Behind them lay grief and scandal and struggle. Before them stretched a future bright with possibility. The wrong ranch had become exactly right. The lost bride had found her home. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Spring came early that year. The snows melted, the creek ran high, and the first green shoots pushed through the brown earth. Emmy planted a garden where Sarah had once grown vegetables. Nate helped her dig the rows, chattering about what his mother used to plant and how she used to sing while she worked. Caleb finished building the extension to the cabin, 2 new rooms, one for the children they hoped to have someday. He carved the doorframe himself, the first carving he'd done in 3 years. And when Emmy traced the intricate patterns with her fingers, she saw flowers and horses, and a small boy holding his mother's hand. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's for you," he said. "All of it. Everything I build from now on is for you." Josie Brennan came by weekly, claiming to check on Emmy's health, but mostly to fuss over Nate and drink coffee in Sarah's chair. She and Emmy became friends, real friends, the kind who could sit in comfortable silence or argue fiercely and still trust each other completely. Henderson's wife brought baby Sarah to visit often. The little girl was thriving, growing stronger every day, a living reminder of what courage and love could accomplish. Emmy held her and felt hope swell in her chest. Hope for her own future, for the children she might bear, for the family they were building. And on the first anniversary of her arrival at the wrong ranch, Emmy stood in the yard with her husband and son watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in colors she'd never seen in Boston. "1 year," Nate said. "You've been here 1 whole year." "Best year of my life," Emmy said. "Mine too." Caleb's arm settled around her waist. "Think you'll stay another?" She laughed. "I think I'll stay forever. Promise." Emmy looked at this man who had been so cold when she arrived, so walled off and guarded. She looked at this boy who had grabbed her hand on the first day and refused to let go. She looked at the cabin that had become her home, the land that had become her roots, the life that had become her heart. "I promise," she said, "forever and always." Nate whooped and threw himself at them. Captain barked and bounced around their feet. Caleb laughed, really laughed, the sound Emmy had worked so hard to hear, and pulled them both close. The wrong ranch, the wrong road, the wrong turn that led to exactly the right place. Emmy Thornton had traveled 2,000 miles looking for safety and found something infinitely better. She had found love. She had found family. She had found home. And home, she finally understood, wasn't a place at all. It was the people who made you want to stay.